Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. In today's video we're going to be talking about the import rules in the game Global War 1914. So this is a new thing for our Global War series, having import rules. There's also going to be import rules for version 4 of the 36 game, although there wasn't any in version 3 or earlier versions of the game. And so this was the first one, and V4 will probably come out before this game does. But those rules, they got the idea from this game, but they changed them because they're different wars, different technology, and you had to adapt the import rules to work for that game. So that's why I wanted to do this video. I didn't want people to be confused by thinking, oh, it's import rules, and so using the V4 rule sets because that game comes out a month or so earlier, right? I'm not sure exactly how long, but it will come out a little bit earlier. So I wanted to let you know what the import rules are for this. Now, import is just simply means that you're in one of the ports, like you see, and there's the blue naval bases here. These are called naval ports. Those are major bases, and then you got the white ones here. Those are minor naval bases. So the import rules only work for the major naval bases, and that includes the ports, and it includes the shipyards, and it includes the dockyards. Let's take a look at a dockyard over here. There we go. So there's a dockyard here in eastern Egypt. So it only works for those three type of ports. It does not work for the minor naval bases, whether they're ports or dockyards or shipyards. Also, though, it does work for submarine bases, but only for submarines. So a submarine can go in port in a submarine base. There's the reason that you would go in port is because it offers you more protection from other ships, right? The port itself has its own defenses. Could be anti-aircraft, could be coastal artillery, could be naval mines. You know, like those are just encompassed within the rule set. That you don't use them all individually or anything. You just simulate them, and we'll get to that in a bit and how that works. But you might not want to be in port because, you know, like that has implications as well. So in this video, we're going to go through the different implications of being in port or at sea, and what the differences are and what the implications are. So let's get to it. So let's talk about how you get into port to begin with. Now, it doesn't take any movement to get in port. Like you're in the sea zone, like here, I've got an in port marker here, and I've got an in port marker there, and you'll use those to mark that your ships are in port or at sea. If you don't have a marker, that means they're at sea. So when the game starts, you can designate all of your ships that are on the board as being in port or at sea. And you can agree with the other people that you're playing with. Are we going to have all of the minor power ships in port or at sea? I would say do it, make them in port, just to make it fair to everybody, right? Anyway, to get in port, you would just have to move to the space, like you'd have to move to the sea zone and say which ships are in port. Like here, I'm deciding, okay, this cruiser is going to stay in the sea zone. And these four ships here, there's a transport, a torpedo boat destroyer, a pre-dreadnought, and a dreadnought. They're going to be in port. Now, in the rules, it tells you to mark each ship, but I think it's good enough if you want just to put a mark down beside a group of ships and just say all of these ships are in this port. You have to have a major port, like I said, to be in, or a major naval base. Like this is a shipyard. This is a dockyard, and we've got a naval port over here. But when I say in port, I mean all three of those that qualify for that. Anyway, so you just have to say that those are in port, and you would do that at the end of your movement stage. So at the end of your non-combat movement, you would say, okay, these ones are in port, these ones are not, or all of them are in port, or whatever, and you put the little marker down to show that those ships are in port. You know, people might ask you, well, what about this one? Oh, no, that one's not in port. It's easier if you just move it away like this and say this one is not in port, right? Just to make it obvious to people. Anyway, so that's when you would do that, is at the end of your movement stage. And that's the only time that you can do that. Let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of being in port or at sea. First, let's do the at sea one, because that is that's pretty easy. There's only two things to know about that. So again, we're looking at this cruiser over here. That one is at sea. That just means that it's in the sea zone. It's not in any one of the major ports or major naval bases that are there. So the advantage or disadvantage is that it can be attacked at any time by other ships, right? Just like normal combat that you're used to in version 3 of 36, you can just go in that sea zone and attack a ship or a group of ships without any implications. You just go in there and attack them. Now, the bonus for leaving them at sea is that it still gets its movement bonus, because while it's at sea, or while it's in a port, it does not get the extra movement bonus for being at a major naval base, right? So this guy, the cruiser here, he normally goes 3 spaces. Well, he's at a major naval base, and so he could go 4 spaces, right? Because you get that +1 bonus. If he was in port, then he doesn't get that bonus. So that's the good thing about being at sea, is that you get that bonus. And the bad thing is that you can be attacked, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, because there might not be anybody close to you that can attack you, right? Or at least not with the sufficient forces. If you've got 5 ships and they've only got 2, you know, then you might as well be at sea, right? Then you get that movement bonus. But that's assuming that you might want to move. If you're not planning on going anywhere, then you can always just leave them in your port as well, right? So that's the at sea part of it. Now, the implications to being at port are a lot more than being at sea. So let's take a look again. Here we've got this cruiser that is at sea, and we've got these ships that are at port, and they're treated differently. I've already talked about, you know, you would still locate them in this sea zone. You would just mark them with an in-port marker, and that you could only get there on the end of your movement phase. And that you don't get the movement bonus. But what else now? Well, the only way to attack those ships is by forcing that port. That's what the game mechanic is called. It's called forcing the port. So you'd have to move your ships into that port and attack them that way. And I'll show you in a minute what that entails. But first, let me talk about the planes. If you were to attack it with a plane. Now, you're not going to see that happen very often, because only a 1918 fighter can attack a ship. The fighters from before that, they don't have that ability. The fighters in this game start with only the ability to observe at the beginning of the game, and that's observation just means that you kick up your artillery by 1, right? Then, you know, like you can do dog fighting, and then you can attack ground units, and the last thing that you can do is attack naval units, and that's not until 1918. You can develop that technology in 1917 to have a 1918 fighter, and you would probably be the only one on the board that had it. But anyway, so attacking ships with planes is not really a big thing in this game until late in the game. And even then, you're not going to have a lot of planes, right? It's not like the 36 game at all with the air war. That's probably the biggest difference in these games is the lack of air power in this game. And of course, there's a reason for that. Planes had just been invented. There were only a handful of people that only had ever flown an airplane before, right? But anyway, so if you're in port then and a plane tries to attack you, let's say the British had this space here and they tried to attack a ship that was in port here, then you would get anti-aircraft shot from your inherent anti-aircraft that is in that facility, right? And that would happen before you would shoot at the ships. The anti-aircraft would get a shot at you. it should be noted that there is no anti-aircraft artillery in this game in the zones. There's only the anti-aircraft that are involved with the facilities, whether that's a naval base of some kind or factories, right? Anyway, so there's the AAA facilities on there, and let's just move on to the next part here. Okay, so you want to force a port. Let's just say I've got these 8 ships here that are going to try to force this port here to try to take out these ships here. So what you need to do is you need to roll for each ship. You need to roll a d12 and roll them one at a time. Like I suppose you could roll 2 dice for the 2 subs and 2 dice for the 2 torpedo boat destroyers, but you want to roll them each individually. Like you don't just roll 8 dice and then pick the crappiest 3 ships. You know, like you say, okay, I'm rolling for a sub, and then you roll that. If you get a 4 or higher, then okay, I missed. Okay, that sub makes it into the port, and the same with the other sub. And then I hit a torpedo boat destroyer, so you lose one of those, you know. And then the other torpedo boat destroyer makes it in, and you keep going down the line until you get all your ships are done, and then you have just normal combat with these guys as the attacker, these guys as the defender, right? That's how you would force a port. The one way that you could avoid that is if you did a strategic bombing raid first, or if it doesn't even have to be this turn. What you need to do though, like you could use either a strategic bomber, or you could use a airship. With Germans, I was going to say Zeppelin, but that's a British one, so it would just be called an airship. Now, you could use those to strategically bomb that naval base, but you have to have maximum damage against it. So it's pretty difficult to do that, right? Like you would need a few bombers that you could, because the strategic bombing happens with D6s, right? And on that major a major shipyard there, that what you max damage is a 10 on that, right? A sub base would be easier. That's a max damage of 3. The dockyard is 6, and a major port is 5. So you would have to damage them that much in order to avoid the defenses of having to roll those 3s on the way in, or avoid those 3s on the way in, put it that way. So that's another thing. I'm not going to go into strategic bombing right now. That's basically the same as strategic bombing in the 36 game. I might do that in a future video. It is a little bit different because you do have the airships, but anyway, it happens basically the same. One thing I should mention though is that if the facility is damaged, like let's say you do it on the same turn, so you damage this facility to begin with, right? Just so you can avoid those defenses. As soon as that facility is damaged to the max, you can move these ships out of that port. And you're going to have to make a decision on that, because if you don't move them out of that port, then they're stuck there until you repair that facility, fully repaired, right? So like you had a maximum damage of 10 on this shipyard. I mean, that might be a better strategy if you just didn't want that guy's ships to move, is to go and damage that. You know, he doesn't have 10 IPP on him, so you go and damage that facility to the max just to trap his ships in there. But you could also do it when you're trying to force a port as well. But all I'm saying is that once you do damage it to the max, then you're allowed to get your ships out of there. And I mean, you might as well anyway, because the other guys in this case is attacking you anyway, right? So you don't have any defenses, so you might as well move them out and meet them out in the sea zone rather than meeting them in the port if the port's not going to help you out at all, right? There are a couple other things to note about forcing a port. First of all, if you do force a port, whether it's against a playable nation like Japan or a major power like Russia or Germany or whoever, or if it's a minor neutral power, then forcing that port, if you're not already at war, is the same as a declaration at war. Doesn't matter whose ships you attack in that port. That's a declaration of war against the nation that owns that facility. So that's one thing. And the other thing is what happens for the outcome of this. So let's say, let's move this out of the way. Let's say this attack took place and you were able to take everyone out but the dreadnought. The dreadnought survived, and let's say these guys were all lost and they said, you know what, I don't want to keep going. I don't want to lose my dreadnoughts. So you move out of there. Now you've saved your dreadnought. However, for every ship which is either a dreadnought or a pre-dreadnought or a cruiser that you lose on an in-port battle, you would place a militia in your home country in that space. Like this is in this space here. So you would place 2 militia in here because you lost a pre-dreadnought and a cruiser, right? Now, if it wasn't in your home country, like let's say it was over in Korea where you were forcing the port, then you would place colonial infantry instead, because you don't place militia outside of your home country, right? But you know, like they're pretty close to the same unit, and so it's one or the other. And the reason you do this is because, you know, like these are big ships, and each ship on the board doesn't just represent one ship, it represents a lot. You got to remember that you're in port there, and so, you know, like at the very least, a lot of guys are going to be able to swim to shore, and they're not just, well, I guess my war's over and go home, right? Like they're still in the armed forces, right? So there you go. They go to shore and they get sucked up into being in a militia, or if they're outside of home country, then they become part of their colonial troops, right? So anyway, that's what you do. In the V4 rules, it's a little different. Like you get a militia when you're attacking the territory or something. I'm not an expert on those rules, but this is different though. Just bear in mind this is different. You get those for when you lose the ships in battle, okay? On the other hand, if you were to have taken out this guy here, geez, I didn't grab another militia. Let me just put one of these on there. So if you did take that out, then once the battle is over, then you would have to move out of that port and back into the sea zone with your attacking ships, unless you had another fight taking place. Let's say you came from the other side of the island on that same territory in an amphibious assault and you took that land zone, then you could leave your ships in port if you wanted to. Now, if you do take that territory out before you attack the ships in port, then you don't get these units, right? Because they've got no place to go in. Like you can't just put them in this one because they're adjacent. It was at this port that it happened to. They're not going to swim all the way to up the coast to this port, right? Like if they don't own this port here, then they don't get to go to the land. And you could stay in port, like I said, with these ships if you wanted to. So I think that's about it for forcing a port, other than, oh, if it's minor, well, I'll just take you to a minor port and show you. Okay, so we have a situation here where the French Navy is located in port in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is a minor neutral power. But either France or one of its allies that they are aligned to are at stage 1 on the diplomacy chart, which means that the port is open to them. So they can go in port to get those protections from the port. Now, if the Germans decide to come in and attack the French here, then that is a declaration of war on the Netherlands. So, of course, not only do you change all these units, but you change all of the Dutch units on the board. And you know that that's substantial. Down in the Dutch islands, there's a number of territories and stuff. But anyway, before the attack even starts, once your combat moves are over, then you would replace these ships with French ships, and you would replace all of these guys as well, right? So there you go. That's now a French territory, and all the other Dutch territories would be French as well, unless, of course, it was a British. British had the +1 in in the diplomacy, right? Then of course that would all change to British, and it would make no difference as for defending, because British ships defending with French ships are, they defend together, right? Just like they do on the land. So anyway, that's what would happen, assuming that the French had +1 in diplomacy there. This is what would happen. Now this would take place, and you would try to force the port, and you would roll a d6 for all of these ships. So you have to be aware of that before you go in there, because now it doesn't seem like such a good idea, right? You might get it because you've got the 3 dreadnoughts there against 1, but still pretty dicey attack now. So you got to be aware of that, and you got to be aware of the fact that one of the big implications there is that it's a declaration of war, and that minor neutral power will join the other side. Another thing that you can do from a port that's not damaged, or not damaged to the maximum, is that you can scramble from it. You can scramble up to 3 ships out of a major naval base of some kind. So let's look at the example here. We have that cruiser. He seems to be at the center of everybody's attention today. So he's out in the sea, and the other 3 Japanese boats are in port. Now the British come in to attack this cruiser. They're not forcing the port, they're just going after the cruiser. The Japanese can decide, if they want to scramble into that sea zone. Now they could not scramble out there if there was no unit here. Like if all 4 of these ships were in port, you couldn't just scramble 3 ships out there. You have to have a ship out there in order to do that. Or, here, let me just set something else up. The other way that you can scramble ships from a port to a sea zone is if they're trying to make an amphibious assault against the territory that you're going into. So like you can scramble out into that sea zone. So you would, like these, if there's transports in there, and they're taking a couple of 4 naval infantry, they're going to attack this territory, then you could, if you want to, scramble ships out into there, and you can only scramble 3, right? So you would scramble them out to meet whoever is part of that invasion force. Like you wouldn't, if the ships had been taking part in a screening force, right, then you wouldn't go after those ships. You would just go after the amphibiously assaulting ships. So of course, if there's ships in port there and you're making that assault, then you're going to want to be aware of that those ships can scramble out against you, and you better take enough to defend against that, right? So that's the other way you can do that. And you think, well, why would I do that? Why don't I just leave them in port? The reason is that if you lose that territory, where's my British marker here? Let's say the British do take this territory here. Let's take this guy off and these guys on. So now what happens is that whatever ships are in port, like let's say you decided to stay in port with all of these ships, now you're going to have to roll a d12 for each of those ships if the British were to take that port out. So if you roll a 1 or 3, then the British capture that ship. You just turn whatever ship you rolled for, you turn it into a British ship. If it's 4 to 8, then it's scuttled. You remove it from the game. And remember, now the British have taken that territory, so you do not get to put the militia or the colonial infantry in there, because you don't own that territory anymore, right? And on a roll of 9 to 12, that ship escapes. So it moves out of port and past anything that's out there. So even if you still had ships in that sea zone, it doesn't matter. You've slipped past them, and you can go up to the extent of your range. So if your ship can go 3, then you can go 3 out of that port. You don't have to go 3. You can just go 2 or whatever. But anyway, you can leave and you can get out of there. But like that's only a 25. Actually, no, that would be 2/3 chance. So there's a 67% chance you're going to lose those ships, and that's why, even if it doesn't look like you should go out there and defend yourself against them, then you probably should, unless you think that like if he's just going with 1 naval infantry and you've got 6, like he's just baiting you, right? He wants you to lose your ships. So these are the kind of little games you gotta look for, right? Not only Not only do you not want to fall in these traps, but you want to try to set these little traps for yourself, right? And that's why it's really good to get to know all of the rules to this game, as it is in any game. You get to know all of the rules, and in that way, you can become a better player, because you can see the possibilities of all the different things that you can do. So that is the import rules in regards to the Global War 1914. I hope you found this video informative, and that you learned something today. So that's it. My next video will be in a few days. I know this video was supposed to be a few days ago, but I've had some things that I had to take care of, and so I couldn't get to it until today. Hopefully the next video won't take as long though, and it'll be out later this week. I believe I'm going to be doing it on trench lines and other things that affect trench lines, other types of land combat, so I'm going to get to that next. So take care everyone. General Hand Grenade out.